And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part I work on Unity rebinding input systems, and in this part I didn't really feel like working on the game anymore. I went and flew a kite instead. And in this part I work on the second level for my game. So let's go over the actual level. Since all of my levels have an alliterative title, being that the two letters that make up the name of the level are the same beginning letter, this level is called the Candy Canyon. I then realized that the letter C was already being used for a different level, that being Creature Cacophony, so I changed the level to be called Desert Desert.
You see, it's funny because desert and desert are the same word, sans one letter.
Obviously, within the name, this level is going to take place within a desert and is going to have dessert items, so treats and sweets and cream's delight, scattered around the level. These also play into the gameplay aspect of the Desert Desert, being that every single one of my levels has to have some weird gimmick. The gimmick of the Desert Desert is floor informations, this being the slippery, slidey, and bouncy floors, and also the sticky floors. Slippery, sticky, bouncy flooring, so different kind of candies on the floor, or an iced lollipop mayhaps on the floor that the player will interact with, and then have different floor surfaces based on whatever the surface of the floor is. Another gameplay aspect of this is gummy sticky balls. The function of these is twofold, the first being if a gummy ball hits a floor surface where a sticky surface already is, so if a sticky surface is on a floor and you get hit by a gummy ball that is bouncy, the sticky surface will then become bouncy instead of being sticky. The same can be said for if the surface of the floor is bouncy and is hit by a sticky ball, it will be made into a sticky surface. Alternately, if the player is hit by these balls instead, they will either be trapped inside of it for a sticky ball until the ball hits something, or if it is a bouncy ball, the player will be bounced off it. So the function of the sticky balls can be a hazard, and they can also help the player. This is the primary hazard of the sticky ball area, the primary hazard of the trash trail. The previous game level was mostly spiky hazards that move around and rotate and interact in a weird way on the surface. Those aren't going to be used as much in this level. The primary hazard is going to be the sticky balls and how they can use to both help the player navigate through levels, for example getting stuck in a sticky ball and going over a dangerous, hazardous thing, or being stuck in a sticky ball and being shot towards something that maybe could hurt the player. So these can be used to both help and hurt the player. I've already gone over the functionality of different floor surfaces in a previous devlog, so I won't really discuss it much in this devlog. Basically, you are either stuck onto a surface, you bounce off it when you land on it, or the floor surface will dampen your control, so you have a slidey, icy-like surface. I want to talk about the visuals. The visual design for the floor surfaces I'm a huge fan of. I basically made two different gummy surfaces. One is a sprite shape that can be used to spread along different surfaces. This is the blue gummies. These are a sticky gummy surface, so if the player is standing on these, they will be stuck in them. The sound effect for walking on these is mud. I'm a big fan of how this makes it sound like the surface is wet and sticky. The visuals for these I'm also a pretty big fan of. They were very easy to draw. It was just a blob with lighting effects to then give the impression that it was also smooth and nice looking while also being kind of cute and blob-like. The pink blobby surface is pretty much the exact same thing, except these aren't in a sprite shape system, so these are just individual sprites that can be arranged and placed next to each other, because these are mostly going to be animated when the player bounces on them, and it was easy to do this in a method where I would be animating specific sprites, in opposed to a method where I would be animating a section of a sprite shape system, because that would be complicated, and I've already done a devlog about animating sprite shapes and how not fun that is. But they're basically blue or pink sticky blobs. You can put them together and make a blue-pink sticky blob. A pretty nice colour scheme, if you ask me. In order to have a nice visual effect for the sticky surfaces, I also use a shader graph to make them wiggle about. This is the same way that I used the shader graph for the grass and leaves in the previous level. I just have them very slightly wiggling about. It does very slightly make them look sentient and alive and moving, but they're not, I promise they're not. but I think this really gives a much better visual for the weird little sticky surfaces that you're standing on, for them to kind of ooze around. It makes them look more liquidy and goopy. Next, I will talk about the iced lollipop visual design. These are the iced crumbs that the player can run and walk on for a slidey surface. I originally wasn't going to add very slippery surfaces, but I saw a message on the internet that mentioned them, and I thought it would be interesting. And also I know that most players don't like slippery, icy surfaces, and, well, I thought it would be funny to make you suffer. So I added them to the game. Primarily, I think a lot of the level designs for the sticky, goopy surfaces could be better designed if I also had the option for an icy surface. I can already think of a couple in my big old noggin, a couple really awful level designs incorporating icy surfaces, so I'm pretty glad I added these. The visuals for these I am also pretty happy with. I just made a bunch of sprites for different iced lollipops. Can you recognize your favorites?
Mine are the watermelon ones.
And then the player can run and walk on these. I also have a variant of these for a sprite shape system, because I also love sprite shapes that I can just curve into any level geometry that I feel like, because I like using curved surfaces in my levels. Finally, to really make the visual better, I also added the icy floor surfaces for the audio type. You can't hear this because you're watching this on YouTube. Go look at my Twitter account. You can probably find a video of me walking on these and having the floor surface audio type. I couldn't actually think of what standing on an iced lollipop would sound like, so I used a crunchy, icy sound effect for standing on these surfaces, basically walking on crunchy ice, and I think it works pretty well. What do you think? The next thing that was added was the gumball launchers. These work in tandem with the sticky flooring types, being that they can actively control the sticky flooring types. But what the gumball launchers do is, relative to the flooring gumballs, is if you get hit by a blue gumball, you will stick into it. If you get hit by a pink gumball, you will bounce off it. The entirety of this system was very, very simple. The first part of this system is that the gumball launchers will fire a gumball after a period of time. They have a system for either firing exclusively green gumballs, and by green I mean pink, blue gumballs, alternating between blue and then pink and then blue and then pink, or firing a completely random gumball. Realistically, I don't have any plans for levels that will use a gumball that doesn't fire one singular colour at a time to not confuse the player, but the option is there in case I want to make a level where a gumball launcher may fire alternate gumballs. The gumballs themselves will travel forward through the air until they hit something, at which point they will break. The pink gumball is the bouncy gumball. If the player interacts with this, I will use the bounce function. I will calculate a bounce direction based on the gumball. This is incredibly simple, just direction to the player, and then I add an override if the player is above the gumball, where I will more default to launching the player upwards than any other direction the player is above the gumball. Otherwise, I will just bounce the player in the direction from the gumball. When interacting with the blue gumball, the player will be locked into a specific animation. They'll be set into the locked state and have their movement controlled by the gumball. They'll be placed inside of the gumball and be rotating around it. This is the sticky gumball. They will then have to wait for this gumball to actually interact with an object, as in the scenery, where it will break open and release the player wherever it hits. This can either be used for platforming, where the player has to go into one of these gumballs in order to make it through hazardous terrain, or it could be used as a hazard, where a gumball will launch the player into something hazardous. One interesting aspect of the gumballs is if they hit any surface where there is a sticky floor, so either the blue sticky floor or the pink bouncy floor, they will turn that surface into the alternate colour of whatever it is. So for example, if a blue gumball hits a pink surface, it will turn into a blue surface. This is incredibly easy. Actually, I did it in a very simple setup. There's no real complexity to it. I just have a child object on these objects that can have either a blue or pink sticky surface, and then I will manually disable or enable the blue floor or the pink floor depending on what it has been hit by, then also playing an effect to mask the fact that an object is just being enabled and disabled. I'm a pretty big fan of how the gumballs work, considering they are the main hazard of this area. They have a nice little complexity to them, while also being very simple and also pretty fun to interact with. In the previous level, the trash trail, all the hazards were pretty much just spikes or enemies, while in this level they will be the gumballs and the enemies, and also maybe spikes. But I think the gumballs are an interesting hazard to base a level system around, because you can use them as also platforming tools. I can be more creative with them because I don't have to exclusively use them as a thing that will shoot the player in the face and kill them. And that's it for Devlog. I still have some more options menu logic to do and UI logic to do, but I wanted to pivot from that this week and work more on the actual gameplay of the game, because I still require another level to be finished before I release the demo for Pep-Pel. So working on this level is the next option. I was originally not very sure on which level I wanted to make next, the options being the Cloudy Cottage, the Aquatic Abode, the Beast Brutality, the Flying Factory. I felt like out of every level gimmick that I have planned to use in each of these levels, that the candy, bouncy floor surfaces was probably the best option to make for a level next, to make it more enticing and fun for players, and also would be the most visually interesting currently for me to draw. So that's why I picked the Dessert Desert. I also like saying the level name. In the next devlog I will be doing more of the visual design for the actual level.